My name is Michael Keane. As of 08 Fudger hours on October 12th, I have officially assumed the duties of Park Ranger, GS Hauser 25-9, at Archwood National Park. This transfer follows a 6-year tenure at Yosemite, a posting I valued immensely. However, due to personal matters requiring proximity to family on the East Coast, I requested a reassignment. The Office of Personnel Management, in its wisdom, assigned me to Archwood, a place I had, until recently, only known as a name on a list of federal park resources. My responsibilities, as per the position classification standard, remain consistent with my previous role to supervise and perform work in the conservation and use of park resources. This includes, but is not limited to, natural and cultural resource management, the operation of interpretive programs for the benefit of the visiting public, visitor protection services, and enforcement of laws and regulations pertinent to the Park Service. I am a man who believes in procedure, in the clear, delineated lines of authority and responsibility that allow us to safeguard these national treasures. There is a form for every incident, a protocol for every emergency. This structure is not just bureaucracy. It is the bedrock of order in the face of nature's inherent chaos. Archwood, I was told, is one of the more remote postings in the eastern United States, nestled deep in the oldest parts of the Appalachian Mountains. It is a world away from the granite majesty of Yosemite. The final 20 miles of the drive were on an unpaved service road that seemed to shed the modern world with every turn. The ranger station itself is a relic, a sturdy, 2-story log structure built by the Civilian Conservation Corps in the 1930s, updated over the decades but still retaining an air of profound isolation. My predecessor, a man named Thompson, according to the transfer documents, had left the place in immaculate order. The generator was full. The radio equipment passed its diagnostics, and the supply pantry was stocked for the winter. The first day was spent in methodical routine. I conducted a full inventory, cross-referencing the physical assets with the station's logbook. I walked the perimeter, checking the shutters and the integrity of the bear-proof waste containers. The air here is different. It's heavy, thick with the smell of rich, damp earth, and what can only be described as centuries of decay. The trees, towering oaks, maples, and hemlocks, form what the trail guides call a green tunnel, and even in the bright afternoon sun, the forest floor was a tapestry of deep shadows. These mountains feel ancient in a way the Sierra Nevada never did. They feel less like rock and more like sleeping giants, their stony bones covered in a thin blanket of soil and trees. There is a silence here that is not merely an absence of noise, but a presence in itself, a profound, listening quiet that seems to absorb sound before it can travel far. It was in the late afternoon, as I was organizing the kitchen, that I found it. Taped to the inside of the upper cabinet, right next to the mugs, was a single sheet of yellowed legal paper, folded twice. The paper was soft, almost cloth-like from handling, and covered in a frantic, spidery handwriting. At the top, in thick, underlined letters, were the words, "Things you ought to know. For your own good." I chuckled. assuming it was a list of local quirks, or perhaps a good-natured hazing from Ranger Thompson. I poured myself a cup of coffee and sat down at the small kitchen table to read it. The generator needs to be checked at 2200. Not a minute before, not a minute after. Top it off if needed. 2. If you hear whistling at night, go inside and lock the door. That song isn't for you. 3. The trail camera on Ridge 4 sometimes picks up static. If you see a file with a corrupted timestamp, delete it without viewing. Never try to recover it. 4. If you find animal remains with no visible wounds, leave them at the base of the large, weeping willow by the creek. Do not report it. Do not try to figure out what killed it. 5. Some nights you might see lights over Brown Mountain. Don't watch them for more than a minute. They notice when you're looking. 6. If you get a call on the radio and it's just silence, say, "The line is clear," and hang up. Don't wait for a reply. 7. NVR use the emergency flare gun, unless the fire is something you can see. 8. There is a set of stone stairs deep in the North Woods that doesn't lead anywhere. You've seen them on the map. Do not go near them. If a hiker reports them, tell them they are mistaken. Log it as a false report. 9. If you see a man with a face that looks or blurry, do not make eye contact. He is not lost. He knows exactly where he is. Turn around and walk away. Don't leave food out for the bears, especially not the one that walks on 2 legs. I read the list twice. My initial amusement curdled into a kind of professional annoyance. This was precisely the sort of thing that gave rangers in remote posts a bad name. Succumbing to isolation, spinning folk tales, and blurring the lines between superstition and safety protocol. The reference to the Brown Mountain lights was a known piece of local folklore, easily explained by atmospheric phenomena or distant vehicle lights. The stairs in the woods was a recurring theme in online horror stories, a modern urban legend for the digital age. And the rest, vague, unhelpful, and frankly, unprofessional. What if a hiker was genuinely in distress and I hung up because of some silent call? Rule. What if the blurry-faced man was a stroke victim in desperate need of medical attention? My job is to provide assistance, to investigate, to be a beacon of calm authority in the wilderness. These rules were a direct contradiction of my duties. They encouraged dereliction, misdirection, and the abandonment of the very people I was sworn to protect. I considered throwing the list away, but something stayed my hand. It was a curiosity, a relic of my predecessor's apparent decline into paranoia. I folded it carefully and tucked it into the back of the station's official logbook. Later that evening, I made my first formal entry. October 12, 2030. All systems operational. Station inventory complete. No unusual incidents to report. Note: predecessor left a list of unofficial protocols. Appears to be a mix of local folklore and potential stress-related ideation. Will adhere strictly to established NPS guidelines and procedures. The safety of the public and the integrity of park resources are paramount and cannot be compromised by unsubstantiated local legends. Keen M. Park Ranger. As I wrote, I felt a sense of satisfaction. I was re-establishing order. I was a professional. a man of science and regulation. A place had clearly gotten the better of my predecessor. I would not make the same mistakes. I would not make the silence and the shadows play tricks on my mind. Here, in Archwood, the rules were clear. They were written in federal code, printed in manuals, and backed by the full authority of the United States government. Those were the only rules that mattered. That night, the wind picked up, and the ancient trees around the station began to creak and groan like the timbers of a sinking ship. I dismissed the sounds, finished my coffee, and prepared for my first full day in the woods. I was confident. I was prepared. I was, in hindsight, a fool. The first official day of patrol began as expected. The morning air was sharp and cold, carrying the scent of damp soil and pine. My agenda was straightforward: a full circuit of the park's primary northern loop, checking trail conditions, looking for signs of illegal trapping, and generally establishing a presence. I am, by nature and by training, a creature of habit and procedure. My predecessor's list of nonsensical rules was a footnote in my logbook, an amusing anecdote to perhaps share at a future regional meeting, but nothing more. My focus was on the tangible, the observable, the tasks outlined in the Park Ranger GS-025 position description. It was mid-morning when I made the first discovery. On the bank of a fast, running creek, half in a thicket of rhododendron, lay the carcass of a large white-tailed deer. Standard procedure dictates a thorough examination and report. I unslung my pack and pulled on a pair of latex gloves. As I approached, a line from the yellowed paper surfaced, in my mind unbidden. Rule Feint 4. If you find animal remains with no visible wounds, leave them at the base of the large, weeping willow by the creek. Do not report it. I scanned the area. Sure enough, about 50 yards downstream, a massive weeping willow drooped over the water. A coincidence. I knelt by the deer. It was a healthy-looking buck, its coat sleek, its eyes glassy but clear. I spent 20 minutes performing a meticulous inspection. There were no puncture wounds, no signs of a predator attack, no bullet holes, no evidence of arrow or bolt. Its legs weren't broken from a fall. It was simply dead. I've seen animals die from disease, from freak accidents, from starvation. There is always a sign, a physical clue. Here, there was nothing. It was as if the life had just been neatly extracted from it. The professional in me documented the finding, took photographs, and logged the coordinates. The man standing alone in the deep woods felt a cold knot tighten in his stomach. I did not move the carcass to the willow tree. I reported it as per federal guidelines. I continued my patrol, the silence of the forest pressing in. It's a different kind of quiet here than in Yosemite. The Sierra Nevada has a clean, vast silence. This is a heavy, listening silence, as if the trees and the moss and the ancient rock are holding their breath, waiting. My route took me toward the northern boundary, into a section of old-growth forest marked on the map as largely undeveloped. And there, on the map, was the anomaly that corresponded with another of Thompson's rules, a small icon denoting a man-made structure with no label. Rule 88. There is a set of stone stairs deep in the North Woods that doesn't lead anywhere. Do not go near them. My duty is to inventory and assess all park features, marked or unmarked. To ignore it would be negligent. I left the main trail and pushed through dense undergrowth, following my compass bearing. After a half hour of hiking, I found them. They were exactly as the urban legends describe: a flight of stone stairs, perhaps 40 steps in total, rising from the forest floor and ending abruptly in midair. They were covered in moss and ancient grime, the stones expertly cut, but clearly centuries old. They led to nothing. There was no collapsed ruin, no foundation, no clearing, just more forest. It was a profound and unsettling violation of logic. Stairs are a tool of transition, meant to connect a lower place to a higher one. These connected nothing to nowhere. I walked around them, touching the cold, damp stone. No birds sang. I felt a powerful, irrational sense of being watched, of trespassing in a place I was not meant to be. I took a photo for the official record, my hand shaking slightly as I put the camera away. I wrote it off as a historical curiosity, a forgotten folly from some long, dead settler. But the explanation felt thin, a flimsy shield against a creeping dread. Back at the station that evening, the sun bled out of the sky, leaving the mountains in shades of bruised purple and black. I was finalizing my patrol report when the radio crackled to life. It wasn't the clean burst of a call from dispatch, but a hiss of empty air. Then silence. A dead channel. I waited. Rule Phase 6. If you get a call on the radio and it's just silence, say, "The line is clear," and hang up. This was absurd. It could be a lost hiker with a failing battery, their last desperate attempt to make contact. This is Ranger Keene at Archwood Station. I have an open line with static. Please repeat your transmission, over. I spoke with the calm, measured authority my training dictated. The only reply was the continued, profound silence. It felt different from an empty channel. It felt weighted, like a held breath. If you can hear me and are unable to transmit, try keying your microphone twice. Nothing. After 5 minutes of attempting to establish contact according to protocol, the line clicked off. I sat back. The silence of the room, now feeling as charged as the one on the radio. A deep sense of unease washed over me. Had I done the right thing? Later, as I was cleaning my dinner plate, I heard it. A faint, melodic sound drifting on the night air. Whistling. I froze, every muscle tensed. Rule Fate 2. If you hear whistling at night, go inside and lock the door. That song isn't for you. I was already inside, but the sound made the sturdy log walls of the station feel paper thin. It wasn't a tune I recognized. It was intricate, with strange, lilting trills and deep, mournful notes that seemed to hang in the air. It sounded inhuman. The whistling moved around the station, a slow, deliberate circuit. My heart hammered against my ribs. I was a federal officer. I was armed. But my hand went to the deadbolt on the main door and twisted it. The solid thunk of the bolt sliding home was a small comfort. I crept to the window, peering out into the impenetrable darkness beyond, the station's porch light. I saw nothing but the swaying silhouettes of the trees. Then, as suddenly as it began, the whistling stopped. The ensuing silence was somehow worse, filled with a terrifying sense of anticipation. I tried to rationalize it. The wind. A strange bird. My own mind, stressed and isolated, playing tricks on me. I needed to reassert control. To ground myself in the logical, I looked at the clock. 21:55. My eyes fell on the list, which I'd left on the table. Rule Fe 1. The generator needs to be checked at 2200. Not a minute before, not a minute after. A wave of defiant anger washed over me. This was the final absurdity. A diesel generator does not operate on magical timetables. I would check it now. I would prove to myself that these rules were the product of a lonely man's fractured psyche. I grabbed my high, lumen flashlight, took a deep breath, and unlocked the door. The night air was frigid, and the darkness was absolute. A physical presence that seemed to swallow the light from the porch. The generator shed was 100 feet from the station. I walked down the steps, my boots crunching on the gravel path. I swept the beam of my flashlight across the tree line, the light cutting a sharp, white blade through the black. And then it stopped. The beam landed on a figure standing just at the edge of the woods. It was tall, impossibly so, and stood on two long legs. It was not a bear. It was not a man. My mind struggled to process what I was seeing, to fit it into a known category. And then I saw its face, or rather, where its face should have been. It was a shifting, indistinct blur like a photograph horribly out of focus. Rule 89. If you see a man with a face that looks wrong or blurry, do not make eye contact. He is not lost. He knows exactly where he is. Turn around and walk away. My blood ran cold. My feet were rooted to the spot, every instinct screaming at me to run. Yet my professional duty to investigate held me captive. The blurry-faced man did not move. He just stood there, in the silent, listening darkness of Archwood Park, and he was looking right at me. Time, as a measurable concept, ceased to exist. My world compressed to the space between my own frantic heartbeats and the static figure at the edge of the woods. It was a violation of all known categories, a walking, breathing impossibility. My training, my years of service, every protocol I had ever memorized, provided no framework for a man with a face that wasn't a face. It was a vortex, a smudge in the fabric of reality, and it was looking at me. Rule 89. If you see a man with a face that looks wrong or blurry, do not make eye contact. The warning screamed in my mind, but it was too late. I had looked, I had been seen. A cold, analytical part of my brain, the part that writes incident reports and testifies in court, tried to assert itself. Subject is approximately 2 meters tall, bipedal, exhibiting no discernible facial features. Possible visual hallucination induced by stress and isolation. But I knew it wasn't a hallucination. The sheer presence of the thing was a weight on the air, a pressure against my senses. It didn't move, it didn't make a sound. But I felt a sense of profound, ancient scrutiny, as if I were a microbe being examined under a microscope. Turn around and walk away. The second part of the rule. My legs were leaden, my muscles locked in a primal freeze response. To turn my back on it felt like the most profound folly imaginable. But the alternative, to stand there until it decided to act, was unthinkable. With a surge of will that felt like tearing my own skin, I broke my gaze, focusing on the gravel path in front of me. I turned, my movements stiff and robotic, and began to walk back toward the station. I did not run. Running felt like an admission of prey status. Every step was a deliberate, measured act of defiance against the terror that was screaming at me to flee. The 100-foot walk back to the cabin became the longest journey of my life. The night, which had been filled with the familiar sounds of wind and rustling leaves, was now utterly silent. Or perhaps the roaring in my ears simply drowned everything else out. I felt its gaze on my back, a physical weight that threatened to crush me. I didn't dare look back. I reached the porch, fumbled with the doorknob, and stumbled inside, slamming the heavy oak door and throwing the deadbolt with a crash that echoed in the sudden stillness. I leaned against the door, my breath coming in ragged, painful gasps. My professional composure was not just cracked, it was shattered. I slid down the door to the floor, my sidearm feeling like a useless toy against whatever was out there. After several minutes, I managed to get to my feet and stumble to the kitchen table. I pulled the yellowed list from the logbook. It was no longer a relic of my predecessor's paranoia. It was a testament, a survival guide. I read it again, and this time, the words were not suggestions, but commandments etched in fire. Rule Why 4 High, animal remains with no visible wounds. The deer. I had logged it, reported it. A violation. Rule Height 80, the stone stairs. I had approached them, photographed them. A violation. Rule Phase 6C, the silent radio call. I had tried to respond, to follow protocol. A violation. Rule Phase 2, the whistling. I had locked the door, but I had listened. Rule Whence the generator. I had deliberately gone out at 21:55, 5 minutes early, in a fit of professional pique. And it had been waiting for me. My arrogance, my rigid adherence to a set of rules, designed for a world that apparently did not exist here, had led me directly into the path of these things. Thompson hadn't been crazy. He had been trying to survive. A flicker of movement outside the window caught my eye. I crept towards it, my heart in my throat. High above the dark silhouette of Brown Mountain, a series of glowing orbs danced in the sky. They pulsed with a soft, internal light, moving in silent, impossible patterns, drifting, hovering, then darting at incredible speeds. Rule Phase 5. Some nights, you might see lights over Brown Mountain. Don't watch them for more than a minute. They notice when you're looking. I felt a strange pull, a hypnotic fascination. But the memory of the blurry face was still seared into my mind. I counted to 60, my lips moving silently, then tore my eyes away from the window, my skin crawling with the renewed sensation of being watched. I spent the next few hours in a state of vigilant terror, jumping at every creak of the old cabin. Sleep was an impossibility. Just after 0200, a new sound began. A loud, rhythmic banging from the direction of the waste disposal area. It wasn't the sound of a foraging animal. It was heavy, metallic, and deliberate. Clang. BNG. I crawled to the small window on the far side of the station that overlooked the bare, proof dumpsters. peering through the glass. I saw it, a hulking shape silhouetted against the faint starlight. It was massive, far larger than any black bear in these mountains, and it was standing on two legs. It moved with a lurching, unnatural gait, tearing at the reinforced steel lid of a dumpster with thick, clawed hands. Rule Fay 10. Don't leave food out for the bears. Especially not the one that walks on two legs. I shrank back from the window, my breath catching in my chest. It was methodically trying to get into the trash, a grotesque parody of a common raccoon, and the sheer, brutal strength it was exerting was terrifying. The rest of the night passed in a blur of fear, when the first gray light of dawn finally filtered through the trees. It felt less like a sunrise and more like a temporary ceasefire. I was exhausted, but my mind was racing. I had to maintain some semblance of my duties, if only to keep myself from completely breaking down. I powered on my station computer to download the data from the park's trail cameras, a routine task that now felt fraught with peril. I clicked through the files: a fox trotting down a path, a doe and her fawn, a raccoon, normalcy. Then I got to the folder for Ridge 4. My blood ran cold. There it was. A single video file, time-stamped with a string of corrupted characters, 26188. Rule 23. If you see a file with a corrupted timestamp, delete it without viewing. Envier, try to recover it. My training, the very core of my professional identity, screamed at me to do the opposite. This was data, an anomaly. It needed to be analyzed, understood, reported. What if it was evidence of a poacher using a signal jammer? What if it was a clue to a missing hiker? But the list, Thompson's list, was just as loud in my head. Envier, try to recover it. I stared at the file name, my hand trembling on the mouse. My entire worldview had been appended in less than 24 hours. The man of science and regulation was at war with the terrified survivor. What unknown horror was contained in that file? So terrible that the only safe course of action was to pretend it never existed. With a choked sob, I clicked on the file and dragged it to the trash icon. I emptied the trash, then ran a secure delete function, erasing every trace of it from the system. The act was a surrender. I was no longer Ranger Keen, GS Yauder 25-9. I was just a man in a wooden box, surrounded by things that defied explanation. And the only rules that mattered now were the ones written on a sheet of yellowed paper. I sat back, shaking, the silence of the station pressing in on me. I had to document this. I opened the official log. My hands hovered over the keyboard, but the formal language of reports felt like a foreign tongue. What could I possibly write? Observed bipedal ursine entity. Witnessed anomalous aerial phenomena. Erased corrupted data file based on unofficial, superstitious protocol. They would pull me for a psych evaluation. I typed, deleted, and typed again, finally settling on a single, frantic line. October 13, 6:30. The rules are real, all of them. As I stared at the words on the screen, a new sound started. It was soft, rhythmic. Thump. Thump. It came from the wall behind me. It wasn't a knock. It wasn't an animal scratching. It was the sound of something heavy and soft, patiently, deliberately, bumping against the outside of the cabin, as if testing the strength of the logs. and it didn't stop. The thumping against the log wall was soft, yet it resonated through the cabin like a heartbeat. Thump, thump, thump. It was patient, methodical. Not the frantic scrabbling of an animal, but the deliberate testing of a structure by something that had all the time in the world. I remained frozen, a statue carved from fear, my back pressed against the opposite wall. My mind, once a fortress of regulations and scientific reason, was now a wasteland. The only thoughts that remained were the frantic, spidery words on the yellowed paper. The list was no longer a guide, it was the only reality. The thumping moved along the exterior of the station, a slow, investigative circuit. It paused at the window, and I held my breath, expecting the glass to shatter. But it didn't. The sound simply moved on, continuing its patient, rhythmic probing. I was prey in a box, and the predator was inspecting the trap. The night stretched into an eternity of listening, every creak of the old building a potential prelude to annihilation. Sleep was a forgotten luxury. I sat at the kitchen table, the useless weight of my service pistol on my hip, my gaze fixed on the list as if it were a holy text that could somehow ward off the encroaching darkness. When dawn finally broke, it brought no relief, only a gray, washed-out light that made the world look sick and tired. The thumping had stopped hours ago, but the silence it left behind was heavy with menace. I was a prisoner. To flee into the woods was to run into the arms of the things that hunted there. To stay was to wait for the walls to finally give way. My professional training was a mockery. What good was a course on visitor, protection against a thing with a blurry face? What was the protocol for a bear that walked on two legs and had the strength to peel steel? It was then that I heard it, a new sound piercing the morning quiet. It was the sound of a child crying. My blood ran cold. It wasn't a faint, looping cry like the one from the Saar story I'd once heard. This sounded real, desperate, and achingly human. It came from the direction of the creek, somewhere deep in the woods. Every instinct, every fiber of my being as a park ranger, screamed at me to respond. This was my core function, to render aid, to protect the vulnerable. I remembered the case file from my predecessor's time. The little boy taken by the bear man, who had a weird face. Was this another child, another victim? I grabbed the radio, my hands shaking. Archwood Station to dispatch. Do you copy? Static. Only static. I tried again, my voice cracking. This is Ranger Keene. I have a possible child in distress, requesting immediate assistance. Over. The silence that answered was absolute, a void that swallowed my words. I was alone. Utterly and completely alone. The crying grew louder, more insistent. It was a sound of pure terror and pain, a sound designed to trigger an immediate, protective response in any decent human being. I looked at the list. There was no rule for a crying child. It was an unforeseen variable, a test that fell outside the established parameters of this nightmare. My mind raced, trying to find a loophole, a justification. My duty was clear, but the woods were not. My eyes fell on the emergency kit mounted on the wall. Inside, nestled in its foam casing, was the flare gun, and the final, Untested rules slammed into my consciousness. Rule Feint 7. MVR: use the emergency flare gun, unless the fire is something you can SEE. The conflict was a physical agony. To abandon a child was to abandon my oath, my very identity. But to break a rule on this list, every violation so far had led to a more direct, more terrifying consequence. The crying became a wail, a raw plea for help that tore at my soul. I had to do something. I couldn't just sit here and let a child die. A desperate rationalization formed in my shattered mind. A fire you can see. An emergency is a fire. A child in mortal danger is the biggest fire of all. I could see it in my mind. A clear and present blaze that I was bound to extinguish. It was a flimsy argument, a lawyer's trick played on the devil, but it was all I had. With a guttural cry, I grabbed the kit, ripped open the latch, and seized the flare gun. I burst out of the station door, the cold morning air hitting my face. The child's cries seemed to come from everywhere at once. Now, I didn't hesitate. I raised the pistol to the sky, pulled the trigger, and fired. A brilliant red star shot into the air, leaving a trail of smoke. It reached its apex and hung there for a moment, a beautiful, defiant symbol of hope against the oppressive gray sky. And the crying stopped. For a single, blessed second, there was silence. A profound, peaceful quiet. I felt a wave of relief so powerful it almost brought me to my knees. I had done it. I had acted. I had chosen humanity over fear. Then, the new sound began. A low, resonant hum that seemed to come not from the woods, but from the sky itself. It grew in intensity, vibrating in my bones, in my teeth. I looked up. The lights I had seen over Brown Mountain were back. But they were not distant anymore. They were descending, dozens of them, glowing orbs of silent, cold light converging on my position. The flare hadn't been a call for help. It was a beacon, a dinner bell, the fire you can see. The horrifying, literal truth crashed down on me. The flare was a fire. I had lit a fire in the sky, and now they could see it. They descended into the clearing around the station, silent and terrible. In the cold, alien light, I saw them. The blurry, faced man was there, standing impassively at the edge of the trees. The bipedal bear emerged from the shadows, its claws scraping softly on the rock. And there were others. Shapes that twisted and broke the laws of geometry. Things that my mind refused to fully process. They were not of this world. They were the reason for the rules. The rules weren't a defense. They were a treaty. A list of ways to avoid notice. And I had just announced my presence to all of them. With the last dregs of my adrenaline, I scrambled back inside the station, slamming and bolting the door. The hum was deafening now. The entire cabin began to vibrate. The light pouring through the windows was blinding. I knew the walls wouldn't hold. I knew I was already dead. But there was one last thing I had to do. One final act of a park ranger. I lunged for the logbook, for the yellowed paper tucked inside. I grabbed a pen, my hand shaking uncontrollably, and scrawled a final entry. A last desperate warning to whoever came next. October 14, 0915. The rules are real. All of them. I broke Rule Phase 7. The flare is the fire. It's not a signal. It's a summons. They see it. They come for it. Don't make my mistake.